Hello and welcome to my channel. Hi, I'm Wendy Haney. Today I'm going to show you how to make this beautiful block called Sister's Choice. And I have opted to do it with 4 fabrics. The original layout that I found that was identified as being done in 1934 by Nancy Page and was in the Birmingham News, so this was made sometime in the 1930s, was using 2 colors of fabric only. But I'm guessing they did a variety of things back then too, just like we did. I had seen it this way, so that is what we're going with. 4 fabrics. And actually, you're going, ooh, those are a lot of half square triangles. No worries. We need 8 of them, and I'll show you how to make 8 lickety-split. Okay, what do you need? We're going to need our background fabric, which I've used like a teal green, our coordinating half square triangle fabric, my light purple, the outside and center squares, dark purple, and our inside squares of orange. Okay, this is a 5 squares across, 5 squares down, and this is going to be a 10.5-inch unfinished block. Now, I will put a link in the description for you to request a template to get the sizing information and fabric cuts that you need, and I will give them for you in a 5.5 for those of you that like it little. I ain't doing it. Nope, not doing it. 5.5, 10.5, and for those like to go big, a 15.5-inch square. That would go together very quickly. Okay, so what do we need? I'm going to put that right up there. We're going to see here. So for our half square triangles, we're going to make them 8 at a time. So these are going to be 2.5-inch unfinished half square triangles. So we're going to use 2 pieces of fabric that are 6.25-inch square. This is going to give you room to trim up your half square triangles once we make them. If you're really, really good at your 1/4-inch seam and don't want to trim up at all, you could get by with a 6-inch square. Not me. I like to be more accurate by trimming up. So 6.25-inch squares. Okay? Now, our orange squares, well, guess what? Those are pretty easy. You need 4 2.5-inch squares. Your dark purple center, you're going to need a 2.5-inch square. But these pairs here, I am not going to have you cut a bunch of 2.5-inch squares and piece those individually. To me, it makes a lot more sense to do strip piecing. And right now, I'm showing you how to make 1 block. So if you're going to make a lot of these, oh, heck yes, do strip piecing. You're going to need 4 pairs of your background and your outside square fabric. So cut 2 strips, 10.25. You need 10.5 inches to get your sub cutting of 2.5 4 times, but the extra 1/4 inch gives you that trim up because you're going to need to square up the edges, and well, it just happens sometimes. So give yourself an extra 1/4 inch. So 10.25 inches of each of the background and your outside square color. And finally, you've got your 4 corners of your background fabric. Can't do much about that except cut 2.5-inch squares. That is what you need to do. Okay, let's get started and make your half square triangles. Your half square triangles, the first thing we're going to do is mark the back of one of the 6.25-inch squares. And in this case, I'm just using a mechanical pencil. It's purely for marking, and you are going to mark this corner to corner, okay? Twice. Now that you've made X marks the spot on the back of one of those 6.25-inch blocks, put right sides together. I highly suggest you then pin it. I just pin in the middle of each of those X's. What you're going to do is you're going to go to the sewing machine and you're going to stitch 1/4 inch on either side of those lines. So put it through your sewing machine, put your foot or whatever marks your 1/4 inch on the line. So you're stitching 1/4 inch on this side. Flip it around, you get your 1/4 inch there, and do the same here. So the line is ultimately going to be our cutting line, stitching 1/4 inch away. Let's do it. Now that you have your stitching done, we are going to cut this. I like to use my rotating mat for this because you're going to cut on your lines, but then you're going to also cut down the middle and across the side. So it gets a little tricky with moving and whatever and maneuvering your rotary cutter on a flat surface. So I find my rotating mat wonderful. Otherwise, just be very careful and you can do it the other way. So, as I mentioned, we're going to cut corner to corner. I press down pretty hard on my ruler and I'm pretty careful with lifting it off so that I don't disturb it. And then same thing, I put it on gently. And yes, you're going to see it move a little. As you can see there. Okay, now you've got your X. You're going to do right down the middle. Kind of get your ruler in the center, your corner seams there, and getting it straight here. And hold tight so it doesn't shift on you. And yeah, as you saw, it's going to move out of the way a little when you cut sometimes. So just be cognizant of that. And do the other side over here. And I'll admit, every once in a while, these things get shifted more than I'd like, and I go, fine, be that way. I move them apart, and if you ended up having just this section and you hadn't cut the half yet, that's okay. You should be able to put your ruler here, line up a straight line there, and get this even with the intersection of that seam, and cut it, and you'll be just fine. You could do that then with each of your pieces. Okay. Now, we have a pile of 8 half-square triangles. So what you're going to want to do is, I always finger press them first. Granted, I have pretty good fingernails, but I really have discovered finger pressing first and then going to the ironing board to press them, because you do not want to trim and square these up until you have pressed them all. Otherwise, yeah, they aren't going to come out right. I'm going to finger press and then press these, and then I'll show you how we're going to trim these up. You now should have 8 pressed half-square triangles that have our little flags out here. And now we're going to trim them. These need to be trimmed down to 2.5 inch. I like my OmniGrid ruler because it has this lovely angle on it, 90-degree angle. So we're going to put that on the seam and then just nudge it up there, because you want a little bit to trim around the edges this way, and your 2.5 inch mark needs to be here on the inside so you can have room to trim after you trim this side. So there we go. And then you're going to trim the fabric that's outside your ruler. Flip it around so you can once again square up with your ruler. This side, the angle stays on the seam. Here on the bottom and the side, it should be on the 2.5 inch mark with room to trim around the edges. And there we go. Now you have a perfect 2.5 inch half square triangle. Go ahead and do that with all 8 of your squares, of your half square triangles. Now, get out your 2.5 inch strips of your fabric. Mine's my purple and my background fabric is my teal, and you are going to put them right sides together and stitch a 1/4 inch seam on the edge. Then finger press and press them open. Now that you have your strips sewn together and pressed, we're going to subcut into 2.5 inch strips. Now, if you struggle with your 1/4 inch seam and getting this to come out right, because this should be, once we subcut it, this should be 4.5 inches. If you struggle with that, cut your strips 2 3/4. Give yourself another 1/4 inch. Sew them together with your 1/4 inch seam. What that means though is as you subcut them and things, you're going to need to trim up the sides. You know what? It is what it is. Or actually, to make it easy, you could, if you made this, for example, if you made this, each of these strips 2 3/4, you could take your ruler and each of these sides needs to be 2 1/4 inches. So you could put your 2 1/4 inch line of your ruler on your seam, and anything that's left on this side, you trim it off. Flip it around and do the same on the other side. That way, you've got your strip in a perfect position now to subcut into 2.5 inch strips, and they're exactly how you need to be. Okay, I didn't. Mine are as they should be. So I'm always go to one edge and I put my one line of my ruler on my seam and I whack off a very, very little amount on the edge to get a nice clean starting point. And then we're going to subcut 2.5 inches. And we need 4 of these. I'm going to just do these because then we can move on without doing another cut of the video. Making sure you keep a line on your seam. That makes sure that you don't end up with something a little kitty wampus. And as I said, I gave you 10 1/4 inches for these strips, which means you'll have just a little bit on the end to trim off. Okay, there we go. We now have all the pieces you need to put the block together. It is really that simple. Now, putting it all together, let's see. What I had to do was print out a template of my colors so that I could have it in front of me to go, oh yeah, that goes that direction and that goes that direction. Hopefully my template that you can download will help you. We're going to put our center square in the middle. And with that there, I know I don't have another purple next to it. So that means the subcuts that I just did, I can do like that. And then we've got our orange squares, our inside squares, and they're going to just go here. Okay, that's simple enough, right? Now, and I was bad. Sorry, we're not quite ready to put the whole thing together. We need to create our half square triangle squares here, but I'm going to show you how this maps out. because laying it out at this point will ensure you get these corner squares done correctly and they're oriented right, because that's the next piece we're going to do. Okay, so then now we've got all our squares laid out. Now you're going to throw in your half square triangles. And your background fabric of your half square triangles is going to be on the outside. It's the simplest way to think about it. Okay, there we go. So what we want to do is get these squares together. And even though they might look slightly different, they're really not. They're all identical. So we're going to pull one out. What I like to do is do this. I like my half square triangles on top. So I'm going to put this over here. And I would highly suggest you do this and pin it, because I had a couple boo-boos when I was making my model because I sewed the wrong side of the square. Then I'm going to flip this over there and pin that. Okay, I now have my two pieces that I need to sew 1/4 inch on the edge, and then we're going to open those up and press them and put those back together. Easiest thing to do is do this for all 4 corner units all at the same time. Because once we have those done, then literally we're going to start strip piecing your columns or your rows, whichever, together to put the rest of the block together. Okay, I'm going to finish pinning these together and paying attention to the right seam so I have them right, and then I'll be back. Now that you have your pieces sewn, your first seam in your blocks, what I do is I lay it out where I've got my oranges on the inside. One set, the half square triangles are going up, the other down. Then I grab my other pieces, and the reason I'm saying this is because when I go to the sewing machine, I've just got a pile of them, and then I press them, and so then they're all not arranged. Then grab your other ones with your outside square, your background fabric, and put those in the corner. And then they should be all lined up correctly. And yep, I swear, no matter how many times I fold and pin, I had 2 of them backwards. So this ensures they're laid out right. And then when you press them, press each of these pairs to the square. That way, this one goes to this square, that one goes to that square. That way, when you're putting them together to make your block, your seams are going to nest because they're each pressed in the opposite direction. So you're going to do this. And then sew a 1/4 inch seam on those. And then when you're done, you're going to have your 4 squares. And what we're going to do is we're going to pinwheel those seams. And then we're ready to put the whole block together with all the pieces. You now have 4 blocks for your corners. And what I mentioned is that you want to pinwheel the center. What that means is you're going to end up like this. You've sewn your seam, open it up, and then just twist that center seam, and it comes loose very easily. One side will go down, the other up. And that way you end up with a nice flat center. Granted, over here, you're going to get some bulk over here. Kind of 1/2 1/6 of the other, kind of where we're going to press our seams to try and get the least bulk in this block. Okay, so we're going to lay out our corner squares. Okay. There we go. Now, we've got our purple in the middle, and we've got our little subcuts that go in here with our background, towards the middle. So you'll have it right if there's not something that matches here. Okay, there is our block, and now it's ready to be put together. You can do this one of two ways. Either do it this way or do it this way. It doesn't matter. Key thing is you want to end up with strips that you can get sewn together, and then we sew those together. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go this way. So we're going to put this over here. Now, as you're doing this, I pressed my subcut piece, subcut strip, my 2.5 inch, towards the green, the teal. Well, as I'm here and I'm flipping it over, oh, I'm good. I can nest those seams because this is opposite direction of the one I'm connecting it to. This one doesn't matter. Let's see if we're good this way. Oh yeah, we're good. If for some reason the seams don't nest, on this fabric, change the direction that you're pressing. Just go back to the ironing board and press it the opposite direction so that you can get those seams nested. We're going to go and do that. When you get that done, bring it back. And then sew your next pieces on. Okay? 1/4 inch seam as usual. That way, when we come back here, you're going to have 3 rows. We now have 3 rows. As you'll notice here, I have not done any pressing yet. So when I finished these seams, I didn't press it before I attached the next one. The reason for that is this will allow me to figure out the best way to press based on everything else. This, I can press these either way because we're pressing 2 squares and we're not going to have the bulk. These, though, we've got our half square triangles, so it'd be a lot better if I can actually press those possibly towards the inside. Yeah. Before, I think when I did this, I pinwheeled these, which caused me some different sizing. So what I would suggest you do is press each of these strips to the inside. So you're going to press them towards these squares. Okay? Then these, you're going to press this way. That way, they will nest nicely there, and they will nest nicely there. Let's go ahead and press those, and then you're going to sew your strips together to complete your block. And then it will be pressed fairly nicely without too much bulk in it. And there we have it. Now, back to pressing. When I did my first block, I did a lot more pinwheeling as I went along. And then when I got towards the end, it was like, oh yeah, but because I pinwheeled, then things won't nest. So what I discovered on this go round is these seams here, don't try and pinwheel them in these corners, just press them towards the middle because there's not a lot of bulk because those are all just straight squares. There's no lots of stuff with the half square triangles in there. So as you get these put your rows together, just press everything to the inside and then you'll end up with a lot less bulk than trying to pinwheel everywhere. And there we have it. This is a 10.5 inch block. And now I have 2 of them and some interesting things. I will put together a template. The link will be in the description below. And I'll also try and put together some things with some different combinations and laying it out so you can see what it would look like in a quilt. There you have it. I hope you enjoyed it. Take care and thank you so much for watching.